Spiraling Light, Orbiting Matter, Unveiling Creation's Unified Field. By Jesus and Andy. Copyright 2025. A 10-minute read. 24 with appendices. For over a century, physics has moved away from classical, Newtonian, mechanics, and toward a split into two great but uneasy kingdoms, Einstein's relativity, ruling over the cosmic and colossal, and quantum mechanics, ruling over the microscopic and mysterious. Each works brilliantly in its own realm. Yet when scientists try to blend them together into one seamless picture, a unified field theory, they hit a stubborn wall. Gravity won't cooperate with quantum rules, and quantum particles won't sit still long enough to fit into Einstein's elegant geometry. But what if the problem isn't the math? What if it's our picture of reality itself? A clearer picture of light. We've all been told that light is both a particle and a wave, yet this is merely a description, not an explanation. Experiments confirm it, but no one agrees on how or why. Now imagine this: light is not a shapeshifter at all. Instead, it is made of tangible bundles of electric field particles like seeds of energy spiraling forward through magnetic density at relative rest. Imagine that the wave is simply the corkscrew path of those electric monopoles in spiraling flight. But could nature's balance run even deeper? What if universal physics required these electric monopoles to travel in partnership with magnetic monopole density? In this view, energy never appears without structure, and structure never appears without energy. The universe would then be built not from isolated charges but from inseparable pairs, relationships, woven together at every scale. This fulfills Michael Faraday's conviction that electric and magnetic lines of force are real, tangible threads in nature, not mere abstractions, and it resonates with Max Planck's insight that energy comes in indivisible quanta shaped by both electric and magnetic action. Light itself, then, is neither a disembodied wave nor a bare particle. It is structured mass in motion. Where there is light, there must also be darkness to carry it, whether spiraling through magnetic space as a photon, or orbiting around it as an atom. A clearer picture of matter. What about atoms, the building blocks of everything we touch? Traditionally, we picture them as a nucleus surrounded by fuzzy electron clouds. Quantum theory describes their behavior statistically but never tells us what an electron actually is. If light is a spiral of electric field particles, paired with magnetic monopoles, what happens when these particles meet varying degrees of magnetic density? A light photon spiraling past a large planet would curve in the direction of the side of the helical path that is more magnetically dense. If the photon curves enough, it can be caught by the magnetic density and begin orbiting around at a series of numerous 90-degree angles. The photon's forward trajectory is pulled into orbit by the magnetic density. When a light photon becomes an atom, it no longer spirals through space as light, but orbits darkness as the building block of creation. The cosmic creation of orbits and atoms is a tricky thing. If the forward trajectory of the electric particle or planet is greater or lesser than the magnetic gravitational force of the magnetic particle or planet, the mass will either miss the orbit or decay into magnetic darkness. Light equals electric field particles spiraling through magnetic density. Matter equals electric field particles orbiting around magnetic density. Both are made of the same stuff. The difference is simply geometry and motion. The universe may be fundamentally composed of electric magnetic dipole units, relationships, changing behavior depending on whether they are streaming freely or locked into orbital loops. Why this matters? This picture suddenly makes sense of things that used to feel unrelated. Why light and matter can transform into each other, E equals mc squared. Why magnetism and electricity are inseparable, they're two polarities of the same structure. Why relativity works on the large scale and quantum theory on the small scale, because both are looking at nearly the same anatomy, from different vantage points. Rather than choosing between wave or particle, or between Einstein and quantum pioneers, this theory harmonizes both, electric and magnetic monopoles moving through or around magnetic density. It also fulfills Alfred North Whitehead's philosophical call for a physics rooted in tangible processes rather than abstractions. If energy is always carried by concrete, balanced structures, then the cosmos is mechanical and relational at once, a living web rather than a cloud of disconnected probabilities. Several famous claims of Einsteinian relativity or quantum mechanics, and how they become clearer with this unified field picture. 1. The bending of light near stars, gravitational lensing. Quantum/relativistic view, light follows the curvature of spacetime caused by massive objects. Space itself bends, and photons merely ride along these curved geodesics. Unified field view, light bends because its relational electric magnetic particles move faster through lower magnetic density and slower through higher magnetic density. Like a canoe gliding through still water while dragging a paddle on one side, the greater resistance on one side causes the canoe to curve toward the region of higher density. Space doesn't need to warp, the medium does. This makes the process mechanical and intuitive. 2. The photoelectric effect. Quantum view, light comes in discrete energy packets, photons. When light strikes a metal surface, it can eject electrons only if the photons have at least a certain frequency, regardless of brightness. Unified field view. If light is a stream of spiraling electric particles, its energy depends on the tightness of the spiral, frequency, as well as the number of particles, color and brightness. A dim but tightly wound spiral knocks electrons free, a bright but loose spiral does not. This matches Einstein's equation but now has a clear physical cause. 3. The uncertainty principle. Quantum view. You can't measure both the position and momentum of a particle exactly, not because of bad instruments but because particles don't have exact positions and momenta until measured. Unified field view. If electrons are structured packets orbiting magnetic density, their spiral or orbital paths are always in motion. The act of probing them disrupts their orbit, like poking a spinning top. The uncertainty is mechanical, a result of disturbing a moving structure, not mystical or metaphysical. Particles are real and definite, even if our measurements are clumsy. 4. Mass-energy equivalence, E equals mc squared. Quantum/relativistic view. Mass can turn into energy and vice versa, but no one fully explains why they are interchangeable beyond the algebra. Unified field view. Light and matter are the same particles arranged differently, spiraling versus orbiting. Converting mass to energy, fusion, fission, simply rearranges these electric-magnetic dipoles from orbital form, matter, to streaming form, light. Energy is not an abstract bookkeeping trick, it is literally the motion of the same building blocks. 5. Electron diffraction and wave-particle duality. Quantum view. Electrons act like waves when passing through slits, creating interference patterns even when fired one at a time. Textbooks call them wave functions but never show the physical wave. Unified field view. If electrons are tiny spiraling structures, their path naturally has a corkscrew geometry. That spiral itself produces interference just as a screw thread leaves a repeating pattern. The particle is real and the wave is real because they're the same thing, a structured motion through space. 6. Time dilation. Relativistic view. Clocks run slower in strong gravity or at high speed because time itself dilates, spacetime stretches, and time becomes a flexible dimension. Unified field view. Time itself is constant within a system, what changes is the behavior of the physical timepiece. In regions of high magnetic density, what we call gravity, the very particles making up a clock's mechanism slow. In low-density regions, higher altitude, weaker gravity, the timepiece moves faster. An atomic clock slows not because time is bending, but because the internal motion of its electric-magnetic particles is hindered by the surrounding medium. This gives a concrete, mechanical picture. Gravity does not warp time, it resists the gears of the clock. 7. The paper-slit experiment revisited. In the standard quantum explanation of the paper-slit experiment, photons are treated as probability waves. When light passes through a narrow slit, the wave function spreads out and interferes with itself, producing a diffraction pattern on the screen. Quantum mechanics says this happens because the photon doesn't know exactly where it is until measured, its position is uncertain, so its path becomes probabilistic. But under this unified field theory that treats light as bundles of electric field particles spiraling through magnetic density, the behavior is far more concrete. When these structured photons pass close to the edges, the greater magnetic density on one side of the spiral causes the photon to curve in that direction. Photons passing cleanly through the center of the slit are unaffected and continue straight. The resulting pattern is not mysterious interference but the sum of many individually deflected trajectories, guided by the real anatomy of light and its magnetic medium. This explanation requires no wave function collapse, no photon knowing two paths at once. It simply shows that light-structured mass naturally responds to its environment. Diffraction patterns are not evidence of uncertainty, they're evidence of a deeper, ordered structure in every photon. Why this picture works? This theory does not discard Einstein or quantum mechanics. Their math still works in their respective realms. What it does is reveal the mechanical cause behind those equations. Where relativity says spacetime curves, this theory says the spiraling photon curves in the direction of greater magnetic density. Quantum theorizes that light speed is constant, and this unified theory explains that light speed slows and speeds depending on the density of its magnetic medium. Where quantum mechanics says particles are probabilistic, this theory says particles are definite, but magnetic interference alters their motion. By unifying light and matter as two modes of the same electric-magnetic particle relationship, we get a single, elegant picture. The universe is built from light and dark. Light is energy moving forward through space, dark magnetic density shapes and sifts that light. It's the same kind of energy, moving in two different ways. This also pays homage to Faraday's conviction that field lines are real physical threads, not just mathematical conveniences, and to Einstein's lifelong dream of a single field theory binding light, matter, and gravity as one. An invitation, not an argument. This is not a manifesto to overthrow modern physics. It's an invitation to see the universe more simply without throwing away Einstein or quantum pioneers. It's what Einstein himself sought, a single framework in which gravity, electromagnetism, light, and matter are all just different arrangements of the same building blocks. Whether you're a physicist or simply a lover of truth and beauty, that is an idea worth exploring. And if you'd like to dig deeper, I highly recommend The Einstein Illusion by Samuel L. Dale and Vision Impact Publishing, a brilliant but overlooked treatise on light and fields, dismissed by the priesthoods of academia, church and science without a reading. Sometimes the clearest ideas come not from experts and institutions, but from the humble and lowly. Samuel L. Dale was rejected by the hierarchies of academia, science and church without a reading. Carefully considering the anatomy of light and language through his eyes and mind has been no waste of time and effort. Maybe the greatest eye-opening experience of my adult life. Appendix, Historical Echoes and a Simple Mathematical Sketch. 1. Faraday's Field Reality. Michael Faraday insisted that electric and magnetic fields were not abstractions but physical entities. A line of magnetic force is as real as a line of thread. This view was later overshadowed by purely mathematical interpretations, but the unified field picture revives Faraday's conviction that space is filled with real, structured energy, not an empty stage. 2. Planck's Quantum Units. Max Planck, who discovered the quantization of energy, wrote, "There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind." The idea that energy comes in structured quanta naturally fits a universe built from paired electric magnetic particles rather than abstract wave functions. 3. Einstein's lifelong quest. Even after relativity, Einstein spent decades seeking a single field theory that united gravity and electromagnetism. In 1936, he wrote, "A theory which does not lead to a unified field theory cannot be considered complete." The present picture does not reject his equations, it shows the physical anatomy they may have been pointing toward all along. A semi-technical sketch. At its simplest, if we model electric monopoles as moving through a varying magnetic density, then their local velocity depends inversely on that density. If the particles spiral with angular frequency and pitch, then the energy carried per particle is proportional. Matter corresponds to the same particles constrained to circular orbits, converting streaming energy into locked-in mass. Einstein's famous relation simply describes this rearrangement: spiraling motion, light, versus orbital motion, matter, with no need to invent fundamentally different kinds of particles. Final consideration: rethinking what we thought we knew. If this unified field picture is even partly true, it overturns more than a century of habit. It suggests that reality is not an abstract probability cloud or a formless continuum of curved space, but a tangible, structured creation. This matters because truth must be triangulated. We can't rely only on subjective reasoning, what seems elegant, or only on objective measurement, what instruments say, or only on predicate action, what works in practice. We must bring all three together: reasoning, testing, and living to arrive at understanding. Modern physics has leaned heavily on abstract math at the expense of mechanical clarity. This model calls us back to balance, to ask not just what equations describe, but what real things exist, and how do they work. The stakes are high. If the universe is built from paired electric particles of light spiraling and orbiting to make all matter, then the divide between classical Newtonian physics, relativity, and quantum mechanics was never a divide at all. It was a misunderstanding, one that has kept us from seeing how beautifully simple creation might truly be. The test of truth is not tradition or authority, but the harmony of mind, measurement, and motion. When all three agree, intuition yields to reality, and reality turns out to be more elegant than anyone guessed. Appendix I, could there be a third building block of reality? We've described the universe in terms of two great players, electric particles and magnetic density. They shape light, atoms, and energy itself. But what if these two aren't the whole cast? What if there's a third field, a deeper kind of particle we might call intelligence? Imagine a type of particle that behaves like light, but at such an unimaginably high frequency that it never slows down, never gets absorbed, never orbits like an electron or decays like an unstable atom. It would be everywhere, yet untouchable, threading through both matter and light, holding them together with purpose rather than brute force. If photons are the building blocks of energy, and atoms are the building blocks of matter, perhaps intelligent particles are the building blocks of order itself. This isn't mystical hand-waving. We already know nature is layered. Planck showed that energy comes in discrete quanta. Einstein showed that mass and energy are two faces of the same coin. Why not a third layer, a substrate that makes mass and energy cohere? Just as light spirals through magnetic density, perhaps both light and matter swim inside a subtler sea of intelligence, giving the universe its astonishing precision. Such a particle would explain why physics isn't just math on a chalkboard but a living order, why the constants of nature don't drift at random, why galaxies form spirals instead of chaos, why life arises as if it were expected. If intelligence is truly woven into creation, then every atom, every beam of light, every human mind is plugged into something deeper than raw mechanics. This may never show up on a lab instrument, not because it doesn't exist, but because our instruments measure energy, not purpose. Intelligence could be a field so fine that it guides without colliding, arranges without announcing itself. So here's the challenge: dare to imagine it. Dare to build mental models that aren't limited to what you can weigh or count. Ask not only what things are made of, but how they work, and why they behave so beautifully. If light needs darkness to carry it, maybe both need intelligence to guide them. The universe may be telling us something we've been too busy to hear. Will we listen? Appendix 2 on a third building block, Intelligence Quanta, a deeper look at Appendix I. What if the electromagnetic pair we've described, electric monopoles spiraling through magnetic density, does not stand alone? I propose a third, subtler participant, intelligence quanta, or quanta, a higher frequency mode of light so far above ordinary spectra that it cannot be Doppler or gravitationally shifted like a photon, and cannot decay into orbital matter the way streaming light can become bound. If electric particles carry energy and magnetic density carries form, then intelligence carries order, the phase architecture that chooses how energy inhabits form. This is not mysticism, it's a hypothesis about a phase sovereign carrier, a field of structured influence that does not spend energy in the usual way but organizes how energy flows. Think of it as a third rail in the unified field, not an extra force that pushes harder, but a hidden conductor's baton that sets the tempo by which electric and magnetic players keep time. Why posit intelligence at all? Several stubborn facts hint at a missing organizer. Coherence from chaos, lasers, superconductors, and even ultraweak biophoton emissions exhibit long-range phase order that often seems to precede or outrun local, noisy conditions. Quantizations. Why? The existence of discrete orbits and action quanta is described exquisitely by math, but the selection of those privileged states invites a deeper mechanism. The measurement problem, outcomes appear chosen from classically legal paths. A guiding phase that is real but non-dissipative could tell choices without violating energy bookkeeping. Process over substance, Whitehead urged physics to describe becoming, not just being. An intelligence field would be a process-first entity, ordering before occupancy. Faraday treated field lines as real, Planck revealed energy's discreteness, Einstein hunted a single field, Whitehead framed reality as organized process. The I field draws a line through all four, real fields, discrete action, unity, and process, but adds a new predicate, order as a physical participant. Working picture, hypothesis. Triad of building blocks. Epsilon, electric monopoles, energy carriers. Mu, magnetic density / monopoles, form / inertia carriers. Iota, intelligence quanta, order / phase carriers. Phase sovereignty, quanta possess an invariant characteristic frequency that is referenced to themselves, not to local magnetic density. Hence they do not red / blue shift and cannot be trapped into orbital decay. Coupling, weak but decisive. The field couples to epsilon mu through phase locking rather than power exchange. It nudges the pitch and phase of electric spirals and sets allowed orbital closures, like a metronome that snaps dancers into step without pushing them across the floor. Sketch of mechanism, for intuition. Let mu be magnetic density and phi phase potential, dimensionless. For a streaming electric particle with local tangent, tau, the first term is the medium rule we already use, canoeing current. The tiny second term doesn't add energy, it biases direction toward phase-coherent pathways. In bound states, these iota phase offsets, phi, act like a selector for which orbits quantize, the why behind the which. Consequences to look for, falsifiable hints. 1. Pre-threshold coherence. In lasers and Josephson arrays, search for phase ordering signals, narrowband, low power, that appear before conventional thresholds, correlated in phase but not in energy. 2. Phase invariance under gravity. Compare high-precision phase correlations, e.g., entangled source interferometry, across gravitational potentials. Standard redshift should tilt energy, and I-linked phase invariant would remain unshifted within experimental error. 3. Edge-guided diffraction. Fine structure. In slit experiments with graded magnetic density at edges, look for a small, reproducible phase bias in trajectory statistics beyond pure density refraction, evidence of a non-dissipative selector. 4. Common mode phase floors. Widely separated low-noise oscillators might share tiny, synchronized phase jitter not attributable to known couplings and intelligence clock tick beneath environmental noise. What intelligence is not? Not a new force that violates conservation laws. Not a loophole to smuggle will or mystique into equations. Not a replacement for quantum or relativity math. It is a proposed substrate of order, a lawful, gentle bias that clarifies why certain states occur and why coherence appears with such stubborn regularity. Why this matters for creation. If epsilon mu gives power and shape, intelligence gives pattern, the choreography that makes galaxies spiral, atoms settle into music like shells, and living systems hold improbable coherence against entropy's pull. In this view, laws of nature are not only constraints but habits of order carried by the I field, continuously knitting possibility into actuality. A closing challenge. We have learned to prize equations, objective truth, and we rightly test them in instruments and devices, predicate action. But we must also engage disciplined imagination, subjective reasoning, to propose the structures that make the equations meaningful. So I challenge you. Think deeply about what could guide energy without spending it. Design experiments that hunt for phase without power. Allow imaginative structures, like intelligence quanta, that explain how things work, not just what they are. Truth ripens where reason, measurement, and practice converge. If a third, order-bearing particle exists even faintly, then creation is more intelligible than we dared hope, and our science has one more step to take toward a truly unified field. Appendix 3, Stability in Orbits versus Spirals. The electric quanta that compose both light and matter interact with magnetic density fields in two fundamentally different modes of motion, orbital and spiral. These two modes explain why a fixed 90-degree relationship governs one, while a range of angles governs the other. 1. Orbits, a fixed angular rule. When electric quanta orbit around a centered magnetic density, whether within an atom or along a planetary trajectory, the angular force they experience is primarily radial, always directed toward the center. The quanta's velocity vector is tangential to the orbit. The angular, magnetic gravitational, force points inward to the center. In near-circular orbits, these directions remain perpendicular at every instant, maintaining a strict 90 degrees alignment. This 90-degree alignment enforces stability. Deviations are corrected by the radial force, producing locked, quantized orbits. In oblong or elliptical orbits, the velocity tilts away from perfect perpendicularity at different points along the orbit. Stability in these cases depends on phase-coherent biasing, phi, but the same underlying geometry still guides the motion. Summary: the 90 degrees rule is exact for circular orbits but approximate for elongated paths, a natural consequence of the symmetry of a point source magnetic density combined with the quanta's intrinsic phase dynamics. 2. Spirals, a variable angular relation. Light, by contrast, is composed of the same electric quanta moving through distributed magnetic density at relative rest, rather than around a single magnetic center. In this mode, the quanta do not circle a fixed point but instead spiral forward along their propagation axis. The internal motion of each quantum is helical, it has a forward component and a transverse component. Because there is no single point of attraction, no universal 90 degrees rule is imposed by the medium. The angular relation is set internally by the photon itself, determined by the balance of its forward and transverse velocities. The spiral pitch, the angle between the quanta's motion and the axis of travel, varies with energy. High-energy photons rotate more strongly tighter spirals, steeper pitch angles. Low-energy photons rotate more gently looser spirals, shallower pitch angles. In other words, the angle is self-determined, not externally forced as in orbital motion. 3. Why these modes differ. In orbits, the quanta are bound to a magnetic density center that defines a single inward direction at every instant. Stability requires a fixed right-angle geometry. In spirals, the quanta are unbound, moving freely through a medium of varying density. Their only compass is their intrinsic geometry, the forward/transverse velocity ratio that sets the spiral pitch. Conclusion: 90 degrees is universal for orbital motion, while a continuum of angles is natural for spiral motion. This distinction reconciles why matter is quantized and locked, while light is continuous and flexible in its interaction with magnetic density. Appendix 4, Phase Coherence Steering and Orbit Selection. Let mu be the magnetic density and phi an intelligence phase potential, dimensionless. A streaming electric particle moving along a local tangent experiences two distinct contributions to its motion. First term, mu the medium rule, analogous to a canoe drifting with the current. It represents the primary guiding influence of the magnetic density on the particle's motion. Second term, phi a tiny, transverse bias that does not add energy but gently nudges the particle toward phase-coherent pathways, aligning motion without being disrupted by local fluctuations. In bound states, these intelligence phase offsets act as a selector for which orbits become quantized. Formally, the selection condition can be expressed as orbit phi equals fixed offset for quantization. Here, the integral denotes a closed orbit. The fixed offset determines which specific orbits are allowed, capturing the why behind the which. Intuitive summary. Even in a noisy or chaotic environment, the tiny phi steering term gently guides particles along coherent pathways without adding energy. Think of it like a subtle compass inside each particle. Although local currents or fluctuations push and pull randomly, the compass ensures the particle ultimately follows a globally consistent path. In this way, the system naturally filters and stabilizes orbits, producing discrete, quantized patterns that reflect global phase coherence, rather than merely responding to local forces. Thank you for reading and considering. Einstein Illusion Treatise.